Hello, everybody. So week two for this video endeavor well, it started off with memories of OCIR. Now we're going to kind of combine memories of OCIR and the drag racing memories groups. I'll give people enough time to come on. I think what we'll do is I may start about 10 minutes early the next time to give people enough chance uh, to catch the video feed. Um, I've added a little bit of organization to the presentation this week with announcements. Hey, Pastor, how you doing? How are things out there in the desert? I'm wondering. I'm thinking they're starting to get hot here. I figured, the heat for the desert there is probably not too far away. A lot of activity this week online since the video presentation last week. My friends list have been off the hook. I've been getting friend requests, probably about anywhere from 5 to 10 an hour daily. I've gotten more friend requests in 1 week than I probably do in a 1 year period. How much rain did you get out there, Pastor? I saw that it was raining down in the LA area earlier in the week. It just seems like the weather's really weird everywhere. We're really dry here in Florida. It's been a very dry month, the month of March, and it's starting to heat up and becoming a little bit more humid than it's been. Andy, I don't want to get a haircut. I want to look like you. Actually, your hair is shorter than mine, and I don't think anybody's going to cut hair right now without the fear of getting coronavirus. So, and I gotta look like a drag racer. Mr. Kevin Sign, man, we haven't talked in a while. We gotta hook up again here pretty soon. I just wonder how you're surviving up there up there in the Treasure Coast. If you're still doing work or not. Brad Fisher, how you doing? All right. It looks like we've got just a handful of West Coasters on here. I'm hoping that more OCIR folks show up because Rick Shute from Auto Imagery made a big announcement this week, and hopefully he's going to be able to pull this off. He's actually discussed it. We've talked about it in private a couple times back when I was living in California in 2016. For anybody who is familiar with the drag strips in Southern California when they were open, like OCIR, Irwindale, Lions, Carlsbad, will remember the Drag Scoop publication. They used to hand them out at the gate when you would walk in, or if you were coming in as a racer. At any rate, Rick is going to resurrect the Drag Scoop brand as a digital format, in the 21st century. A lot of magazines have closed down their printing presses and have gone online. Well, Drag Scoop has sat dormant for the last couple of decades. It's actually been the last few decades. And remembrance of Guy Bennett, who was the publisher, Rick is going to, he's looking for old copies of Drag Scoops, anybody that may have any that he would rightfully give you credit, and everything would be scanned and I believe returned back to you. I have to get the details on that. He's going to build the archive as far back as it can go, as far back as the material he gets, and I'm sure he's going to be adding to it over time as he builds. It's also going to be moving forward from this point in time with all the modern with little tidbits of NHRA events. I would assume maybe some, the Heads Up, the Outlaw, I'm not sure if ADRL is still around. I can't remember. But it's going to be a modern take on the old classic magazine, the newsprint that used to come out. I'm really excited about it. The beginning of California Drag Race Memories, I'm going to probably refer to it as an acronym from here on out, which would be CDRM. The membership as of this afternoon was already up to 371 members. That is just, it's the same rate that Memories of OCIR was when we first established it back in 2008. Although I'm gonna be spending more time with the CDRM brand, because this is not just going to be a Facebook page. It's going to be I have a YouTube channel for it now. There is also a Patreon page. It's going to include a lot of my. I'm gonna journal, so to speak, a lot of my memories, things that the experiences I had for the last 50 years of 50 years being around the sport. I'll be focusing more on the CDRM side over in the CDRM group, although the Memories of OCR group continues to grow and is still well managed by Hans Jacob, my brother Dale Smith, and the founder Randy Wickham. Hans puts an awful lot of time into it and keeps it moderated, fishes out some of the bad stuff that comes through, and he's very active with it. And as I mentioned last week, he's very knowledgeable about OCIR as the facility itself, more so than Dale, Randy, or I. Dale, Randy, and I, we grew up as second generation racers. Our fathers raced, and so we were always active in the weekly activities, the racing activities that went on at the track. But Hans has a better grip on a lot of the trivial stuff and the memorabilia, a lot of details of the track. So it's really good that we have him on board. I'm going to be continuing expanding the CDRM brand, so to speak. It's going to be a multifaceted digital media service that I'd mentioned. It's going to include the new Patreon blog, like I said. There'll be a paid subscription side of it, which will include the entire backlog, the entire archive of everything I write. There'll be some in-depth material that won't be available over on the free side. There's going to be some exclusive content as well. I also plan to open up an Instagram account for the CDRM for the CDR network as well. That's going to be the highlight of my days of probably about the next couple of weeks at least. And as mentioned, there is now a CDRM YouTube channel. The purpose of that was for the video live feed over on that side, where we can have guests come on as a video presentation. That's still being looked into. I have two other channels that I've managed. One I've had for the last, I'd say, 11 years. It's called Race Mustangs, which is based on the racemustangs.com website I've had for a number of years. That one's focused on my late father's 65 Mustang and a little bit of my exploits. It's an incomplete site. There's very little content on it right now. I'm still trying to determine if I'm going to continue with it or shut it down and move everything over to the CDRM and make an offshoot for it. So that'll be that's something to be discussed later on. The issue with the YouTube feeds and being able to have the guests, I've already talked to a few people. One of them is pretty prominent in the sport of drag racing from the past. I spoke to him earlier today on the phone. I don't want to give anything out yet until everything is up and running, and we know that it's going to work properly. But it is going to be exciting. There's a lot of people I've been corresponding with, going back before this whole, ramping up the activity with Memories of OCIR. It just seems a waste knowing all these people and having all these adventures and experiences in the past and not being able to share them with a lot of you people. A lot of the folks out there that are watching this know a lot of these people on a first name basis, on a personal basis. So that's what's going to make it interesting. And the fact that we can, interact through texting on the side, being able to communicate with the show just makes it all that much sweeter. So that being said, I want to again thank Rick Shute and Dave Commel for all of the work they've done over the years. The contribution to the sport has just been nothing short of phenomenal. With the other big names like Steve Rias, there was another one that we had. There's Dave Wallace, a couple of guys over there from Hot Rod and the Peterson group. They did do a lot of contributing as far as photojournalism over the years. They did a lot of technical write-ups and feature articles on a lot of the cars that raced at Irwindale, Orange County, Carlsbad, and all the cars in Southern California, even Northern California for that matter. But it's going to be with these two guys, especially Rick and Dave, working together during the drag scoop era. And of course, Steve Rias with his, being a Northern California guy and focusing on the West Coast, the big fuel car meets that used to go on. Their work is a lot more in depth visually, with all the photos they've taken over the years. And they, especially between Rick and Dave, capturing all of the activity that went on a weekly basis at OCIR, Irwindale, and even Lions for that matter in the earlier years. You can't see any that material in some of the bigger publications, the bigger legacy publications. So we're really happy that they're willing to share their material and keep their archive open. By the way, all members are permitted to post unaltered images. You could take from those two archives and put them on the group pages, the OCIR page, the California Drag Racing Memories page, and any other group for that matter. And you can also link them to your own page. And all they ask in return is that you do not alter the images. That's actually a violation. That's a legal violation. And to link back to their archives, the pages themselves. All it does is it helps boost their business, which helps keep their livelihood going. And they keep digging up the archives, older images that we considered lost. They're reintroducing back on a digital format and making them available again. So it'd be good to see people support those guys. I haven't talked to. There's a couple other people that had contributed in the last couple of decades, last few decades, I should say. One of them is Tim Marshall. Tim Marshall goes back quite a ways. Tim actually captured a picture of me driving my father's car during the March meet in 2011, I believe, a good side shot. And I've corresponded with him a couple times on that. And I think he's done some other images of my activities. I believe there was some from the Moon Eyes event back in 2011, the Christmas party, which was part of the West Coast AFX and Nostalgia Superstock Association group. They had a show that they put on. The other guy's Bob Johnson. Bob Johnson is responsible for a lot of the in-depth photojournalism for LA County Raceway, formerly Antelope Valley. He's also an official NHRA photographer does national events, works with Rick Shute, and has a pretty wide variety of material that he's made available. And then the other one that I have not talked to, they do, their material is available to the public, anybody that can put it up, is the Peterson Archives. Peterson, as a lot of people know, was the main publisher, Robert Peterson, the main publisher for Hot Rod Magazine, Carcraft, I believe Motor Trend, and a couple other of the big, the mainstream automotive magazines that go back, to mid 20th century. Ever since, he's passed on, the organization's been sold a couple times, but the good thing is that Peterson Museum in LA is alive and well. They've got quite a collection of cars and memorabilia going back over the years of hot rodding. And just recently they've opened up, or they've started to scan and upload their photo archives from a lot of the material that guys like Steve Reyes, Rick Vogelin, John Asher, and some of the other names out there that work for those publications. That material is being uploaded as well at Peterson. I want to talk to them and see if we can maybe work out some kind of arrangement, and I'll start posting some of their material no matter what, but we'll get heavier into it, I think, after I can, they know what's going on. So at any rate, this week, take a look and see how many questions we got here. I wanted to talk about the clubs. Remember, a lot of the clubs that ran, it's just mostly an OCIR thing. There was SBRA, South Bay Racing Association, Orange County Bracket Racing Association, which is better known as OCBRA, Wilson Ford Drag Club, which I was wrapped up in because of my father. And there was another one, I believe it was called IDC, Independent Drag Club or something like that. That was a lot of the Irwindale guys, like I believe, I had the names here earlier. Yeah, Paul Higgins, Pat Melendi, Hollis Kalisher, Big Mike Burbach, Wes Johnson, and I'm not sure Al Padron. Al spent most of his time out in Orange County, but I know he and Bruce Tolliver were pretty close. We got to know Al and Esther a lot, probably the last, 1978 and 79, when my father got really serious about the Division 7 points. So we all got to be pretty close, did a little bit of traveling around the California tracks during that time. We tried to get Wes Johnson, we tried to get him to break away from IDC. I'm not sure if I have to go back and look. I believe he became a member after we moved away in 1979. I know in 78, I believe, we were prodding Randy Fabreau. Randy had the 1969 390 Mustang that eventually went to Ed Ursus. That's the car Randy had when we were working on him to join. And also Joe Fralick, if anybody remembers Joe with the little Annie Fanny 427 powered Bantam Roadster. By the time Joe had joined, he had put his Bantam up for sale, and he and Randy went partners on the Don Lutz, I should say Don Lutz and Larry Sogstag were partners on that car in the beginning. But that is the Lee Hunter Pinto. When Lutz and Sogstag got a hold of the car, they ended up making a bunch of changes, and they put a big block Chevrolet in it. At least that's what I remember Randy telling me. But Randy and Joe ended up acquiring the car for Pro Gas, because that had become a big thing starting in 1977 when the Southern California Pro Gas Association had formed. And that really grew in a very short amount of time. But being that it was a Chevrolet-powered Ford body, it wasn't eligible to be a Wilson Ford car, so they had to opt out of the club, unfortunately. Nonetheless, I did spend a lot of time working with them when they had the pro gas races out of Orange County. I was usually driving Randy's Ranchero, towing the car, or driving, when they were tow roping the car back from the runs, I would be in the car. It was kind of a fun time. It was Randy Fabreau and Joe Freilich. Scott Kendig would be hanging around. The Markhams. There's a couple other guys from Irwindale. I wish I could remember their names, but I don't. But we all had a good time back during that era. I was thinking of South Bay earlier today, and the officers that they had. I probably should have communicated with Roger Green or maybe. I'm trying to think now. I know Joe Standard comes on here. But a couple of the South Bay guys that the former members, they would know better as to who was, who was running the president of the club. I believe, from what I remember, John Sowers was the standing president. At least I know when we went up to Boise to the Bracketeer Nationals in '78. I also believe Jim Martin Clean was an officer as well. I wanted to know a little bit more about the structure of that, but the thing I remember were the match races we used to have. Early Saturday mornings, we would rent the track, and it was usually Wilson Ford versus South Bay. And we would get a few guys that would come out that were not part of either club, but sometimes take sides or just come out and make some time runs with their cars. And thinking of speaking of the officers for the clubs, I do remember Wilson Ford pretty vividly. My father joined in 1975. Henry Stokes was actually the president at the time. I believe Tony Barkart was match race chairman. Joe Burke had been the treasurer most of the time. He was a member of the club. And I know Bruce Larmer was at one time. I believe he was match race chairman the second or third year, I believe. If anybody remembers Bruce, he had a little Windsor-powered black Pinto that was street driven. He would come out and run bracket 4 at Orange County. Incidentally, we ran into Bruce. He was working for NHRA the last we saw him. It was in 2005 in Bowling Green, Kentucky. My dad, brother, and I made the trip there for the Holly National Hot Rod reunion, and we managed to run into Bruce. Stan Blosk, another member of Wilson Ford, who got into some match racing in the mid-2000s with his altered wheelbase Falcon. He was there too, so it was kind of neat. We had a little mini Wilson Ford gathering, with Dad, Bruce, and Stan Blosk. So what Bruce is doing is he's working in NHRA Tech, apparently, or event coordination, and living in his motorhome, and he's traveling around the country. That's the last that I know as of 2005. Another member we had, a lot of people probably don't know this, we had an honorary member that joined the club at the end of 1978, and it happens to be Dino Nicholson. It wasn't that we felt that it would bring notoriety to the club. We did have a pretty good following in Southern California, and it was pretty much a regional deal back then. But the main reason for Dino Don was, I'd mentioned last week, he was sort of the spoke and a hub system of all these different Ford racers in California. A lot of work went on at his shop while he was there and while he was away. He spent most of his time there in the winter months. He would come back from Atlanta, I believe, in October. Greg Foreman, I don't know if he's on here or not tonight, he would know better than anybody because Greg worked out of his shop the entire time that we knew him. The cylinder heads that he did for my father were done there at his shop. Charlie Hoffman's heads were done, and there were two sets of heads that were basically the same. They were trying different combinations. My father's engine, and Charlie had a few different things with his. So all that work was done in a dyno shop. Don Cumby spent a lot of time there. Remember being out there. I would go out once in a while. I would go out during the week with my father in the evenings, but it was usually on the weekends we would spend there. And it seems like 2 out of 3 times I was there, Cumby was there as well. That's where Cumby worked on his 385 series development work. I may have mentioned it last week. That's based on the 429 and the 460 big block Ford that he built. That the Stroker 513-inch engine he ran in his Torino the later part of the 70s, and now all the work that went into that. Apparently, Cumby and Kazi worked together, and Kazi came up 13-inch match race engine that Nicholson used in his Mustang that got him. He was the first one to record a 7-second pass with a Pro Stock. During the weight break. During the weight break era, pre 500 cubic inch rule year or rule era, I should say. So many of us spent time there. Dave Budget, when he was running his white 69 Cobra Jet Mustang, when they converted it back to run super stock, they did all the work out at Nicholson's shop. So Dino was sort of a father figure to everybody. Anything that was going on with the Fords, you'd probably find it over there at Dino's shop. So they wanted to kind of bring him in as a, I don't want to say mascot, that sounds kind of cheap, but on a friendly gesture, and so that he could be exposed to everything that was going on in the club and activities, and if there was time where he could join in on the festivities when we were doing stuff, whether on the track or away from the track, he was obviously invited. It was a really, really neat time back then. As a kid, I would have never guessed even walking up to the man and asking his autograph. And it was years later, I would find myself just having conversations with them, and my father would be out at the shop, and they would talk about anything but racing, believe it or not. That was one thing about Dino that was kind of interesting. Speaking of the club match races with Opera versus Wilson Ford, or SBRA versus Wilson Ford, I want to put this out there. Anybody remember a guy named Bob Silva? Bob ran I believe it was a 1964, maybe it was a 1965 Falcon. It was a straight axle car, sat kind of high, had big tires on it, and it had a big block Chevrolet. And he would come out and run it on Saturday mornings with us when we would rent the track. But I'd rarely ever see him on a Saturday running brackets. He would come out on Wednesday nights once in a while. He was friends with guys like Trueblood and Dick Edenholm, and a couple of the guys over at South Bay. I just remember him being more friendly with the Wilson Ford people. He was kind of a party animal from what I remember. I remember walking back over in his pit area, when we would shut down for the morning as they get ready to open the track up for the regular bracket program on Saturdays, and walking past Silva's van and smelling party activity is the best way I could put it. And I knew it was coming from his van, kind of like a Spicoli moment. But I remember Bob being really cool. A lot of times on those Saturday mornings, I ended up getting tasked working the Christmas tree. So I remember Bob making, several runs. He would come up. Uh, I would, the people I knew, he'd come up and they'd do their burnout and pull up to the starting line. You'd kind of wave to him and kind of do that thing. And, Bob would clown around with me a little bit. He was kind of a prankster too. But like I said, we had a lot of fun back then. Uh, let's see. I'm going to look at some of the questions here you guys have got. Uh, I see Phil Sarin. Phil, I'm sorry I haven't posted your other pictures yet. Just been a crazy week, but we're definitely going to get them up. It just seems as this thing starts to escalate, if anybody wants notoriety, that's probably the best time to get the pictures up because it seems everybody's chiming in about that time. Brad Fisher, he asking me if I know Paul Duarte. Why? Crazy Paul, assuming that was a street racer. I know a lot of the Whittier guys joined this week. Uh, I'm dropping names now. Let's see here. Let me go back. If I can find it. Yeah, Ron Fulbright. I'm sorry. I was trying to remember your name, Ron. I have to say it. I have to say it out loud a few times before I can make it a household name underneath my roof. But I know, Ron, you brought a lot of people over. For the folks that are not from the Southern California area, there was a hotbed of street racing that went on. A lot of the meetings used to go on in Compton. We had a couple other places in different areas, but the activity, for the most part, took place in an area in over in North Long Beach. It's Santa Fe Avenue and Del Amo. That area and that where they street raced there, that has been going on for decades. It goes back, I want to say, to the late 40s, maybe even early 50s. When my dad got out of the service, he had a 1953 Studebaker Champ Starliner, and he belonged to a group. And it was a sort of a loose club. It wasn't really, they didn't have an official name or organization, but it was just a group of guys that had these 53 Studes, and they would go to the different drive-ins back in the 50s, like Hody's and the Clock and a couple others in Long Beach and Lakewood. And a quick story, I don't know if I shared this last week. It was about those group of guys with the Studebakers were meeting at Hody's over in Lakewood, and they got this guy George. I can't remember his last name. He used to race at Lions with his Studebaker. He worked at Firestone. Tested. He would take tires out and run them in his car. It was apparently a low 14-second, high 13-second Studebaker. It was street driven, a daily driver for that matter. He got picked off by some guys that were racing a Roadster, and they had said, "We want to run the fastest guy in your group. Who is it?" And they picked out George, and George says, "Where do you want to go?" And they said, "Santa Fe and Del Amo. That's where everybody would go." And they said, "Fine." So they came back with a trailered Roadster, and George says, "No, it's supposed to be street cars. We're going to do this with street cars." And the guy says, "No, any car. It was one of our cars, and that's the car running." George says, "Fine." So one of the guys got a hold of Jocko Johnson in the middle of the night. It was probably like 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning, and they all met up and they looked at Jocko's Streamliner and they said, that's not fair. We have a Roadster. It's a street Roadster." And they said, "Nah, any car, right?" And they said, "Yeah, but it's got to be a street car." They said, "Well, yours is on a trailer." And they said, "So?" And the guys at the roadster says, well, that's not a streetcar. So they took 2 flashlights, taped it to the nose of Jocko's Streamliner, and they looked and they said, okay, it's a streetcar now, let's go. And that's where they ran, with Santa Fe and Del Amo. I know there's a lot of crazy stories. I know that Ron could probably share several of them. The only formidable race I saw, and I wish I could remember the guy's name. Any of you guys, Steve Denty or Fulbright, might be able to help me. Was a 68 Camaro. I believe it was a 68 Camaro. Black 68 Camaro, had a 468 with a single Dominator on it. Apparently had a stage of spray on it. I'm not quite sure. It was a stock chassis car, stock suspension car with a had 11-inch slick. It was it had a race engine in it, and it was street driven. He would drive it in, but they trailered it most of the places. That's the car that ended up running Jack Duchette with the VW Bug. And as everybody knows, Jack's cars, none of them were street legal. The one they ran that night, as a matter of fact, had a fiberglass front clip with no lights or provisions or anything. It was like a total drag bug, full roll cage, wheelie bars, the whole deal. And Duchette's Bug actually beat the Camaro. The place I used to meet when I met some of the guys that we're connected to was Angelo's. I lived in nearby Anaheim, off of Beach Boulevard, when I owned Randy Gillis's old the Pinto station wagon. And I would cruise up on a couple nights a week, when the activity would pick up, or I'd go there on Saturday. And that's when I started to meet some of the players, the guys that were connected to the people that I met through Ed Ursus in the late 70s. I went one time when I was in high school against my mother's wishes. She didn't want us to be any part of that. But I had always asked my father if we could go with Ed so we can go check it out. Hey, Paul Higgins, you're very welcome. This is one of those moments I wish that we could put voice, or we could bring voice in for everybody. Paul, I did mention that. I mentioned that last week, maybe, about Bruce Tolliver, and when you were racing your white 63 Plymouth out of Orange County. I just remember the entertaining moments, being around you and Pat Melindy, listening to you, Pat, and even Hollis, when you guys would get together. It was always amusing. It was always fun to watch you guys run the cars too, especially your white Plymouth, Pat. That was an unbelievable car. Kevin Hardy. By the way, folks, if you see Kevin Hardy's name on here, he is part of the Hardy Boys clan, Pat and Terry Hardy, that raced the 55 Chevy 210 in the Bel Air, and also the 150 Business Coupe 56, which was my absolute favorite 56 Tri-5 Chevy of all time. That has to be my favorite. That car was special. It didn't have any fancy paint on it or anything. It was just plain white. The car was as plain as a taxi cab, but man, did it run hard. And they raced, Pat and Terry with the 55 back before they made all the rule changes, the weight changes in Superstock. We're running Superstock U and Superstock T, and they were one of the heavy hitters in those classes. And then they did a weight consolidation and broke away the classes RT and U. They went away, and they got consolidated into O and P, I believe, or just P. So Pat and Terry, I thought they'd swap bodies, but I found out earlier this week that they ended up with the Gary Bowes and Larry Torres 56 Chevy that they converted to a 150 Business Coupe, with the wooden back. I know that the black and white 210 post car they ran was set up as a business coupe as well. But I think the rules were more in favor with the 56. But Kevin, you can probably comment on that better than me. Obviously, you would know more. But that car was it was a sight to see. If you enjoy door cars, stick shift cars especially, that car was nothing short of amazing. Just from the way it sounded, the way it ran, launched really hard. As a matter of fact, there was a couple pictures posted earlier this week from OCIR of the 56 when Popular Hot Rodding, I forget who it was that was shooting the pictorial, but they took pictures of the 56. That they brought the car out, and Terry had a pair of Goodyear slicks that were bigger than what they normally ran on the car, that would really hook hard, and they did it to do wheelies to get the car to actually wheel stand on some dry hops. And I'll never forget that night when they did that. I thought it was unusual because Terry's driving style completely changed for that one run. And then when the magazine came out and answered it, I remember there was people taking pictures, but there was always people photographing out there. You never know if it was somebody private or if it was somebody from a magazine. So it was kind of cool to see that. I see Tim McDonald's on here from back east. I've been reaching out to a lot of the Division III modified guys, Tim. I contact or I communicate with here I go again. I'm getting bad with names now. With Mike Keener. I was trying to spit out Mike's name. Sorry, Mike, if you're on here. But I want to start posting more links to pictures of the modified cars, from you guys that would come from back east out west. That always made those races just absolutely special. I don't know if you've, Tim, if you've managed to friend or link up with Coleman Roddy. He's on here. I know Coleman's going through some health issues right now, and I've been praying for him. Just a really great, genuine soul. And I'm glad that, with this new group, it gives us more latitude as to who, what we can post and the material. There was just so much that went on in California back especially in the 70s. That was I think I favor that because that was the time we were living out there, and just them. But, going into the 80s, there was quite a bit going on as well. The sad part was that modified went away. Was it 81 or 82? And that was my dream when I was younger, is I wanted to end up in a modified car. But looking on the internet, watching this nostalgia movement that's really grown in especially the last 20 years. There's now an organization in the Midwest that is banding together some tribute cars, but also some cars that have been mothballed that were former modified cars. It'd be nice to see that grow, and then to see that the West Coast can get a glimpse of that again. Let's see here. Andy Nearing. Your comment will make me feel old. Let's see here. God bless you too, Pastor Clifford. I'm sorry I didn't catch you when you left the video feed, but we'll definitely be in touch as usual. So we're going to keep working on getting the word out, letting this thing build up a little bit. We're going to, not a little bit, we're going to build it up a lot. That's the plan is. We want to, I want to keep building this to honor, like I said, the history of what went on out in California. Like a lot of people out there that still live there and others that have moved away, I took for granted what that state represented as far as the sport goes. Obviously, the state of California has got its issues now politically. I don't really want to even discuss that, but as far as the sport goes, that living here in the East, living in Florida, I've been in Florida probably as long as I've been in California, and have attended a lot of different automotive events, racing and car shows, and uh, sports car racing, and other types of venues. And it's just remarkable to hear people talk about um, Lions Drag Strip, Orange County, Irwindale, the cars in Southern California, and the speed shops are out there, and the names of the racers. And I never in a million years would have guessed that California was like a mecca for the sport. Um, Here in the South with NASCAR, you got Daytona, you've got Talladega, you got Charlotte up in North Carolina, Martinsville. Um, those are the big tracks that are synonymous with NASCAR. That fortunately, they're still in operation. For us in drag racing, there's the Big Go in Indianapolis, but that's the once a year event, and it was because it was the center of the country, and it's like soapbox racing, soapbox derby. They do that. It was big in Ohio, but they got racers from all over the country that would go there, and that was their World Series. Um, but in drag racing, the the core of it was from California. Again, here in the East, we had Don Garlits, we had Jungle Jim up in Pennsylvania. Let's see, um, guys like Cheryl Greer from Tennessee, um, and even Kenny Bernstein. Kenny Bernstein's a Texas native, but he ended up in California with Ray Alley. But the tracks we had: Lyons, Irwindale, Orange County, San Gabriel, San Fernando, Pomona. Even Carlsbad for that matter. There was it was Everybody had heard of them. Everybody from back east is they're familiar with those facilities, and it's just a travesty that those tracks have all had to close. Except for Pomona, obviously. But Pomona is um, unfortunately uh, a war going on with the county of Los Angeles and the surrounding neighbors, and we don't know how much longer Pomona is going to be around, and it's only the two events. When I was growing up in the '70s, it was just one. We had the Winter Nationals, and that was it. 4 or 5 days out of the year. Um, Now we've got the new Irwindale, which is an eighth mile. It's nothing near what it used to be. Um, it's a nice facility. I'll never knock it. I've actually run there a few times. Um, the track surface was a little sketchy in the beginning, and I don't have the driving my father's 65 was it's a low 7 second or mid 7 second eighth mile car, so it wasn't really fast. But getting past the finish line, uh, my first time running on the right lane was at the Moon Eyes event, and it was a roller coaster ride down at the other end, and it got really frightening. And you got to be on the binders fast. Um, but the facility itself, it was fan friendly. I thought, it was kind of quaint. It's not big like like Pomona or Las Vegas or some of these bigger venues, but very clean facility. They have Bob Beck as an announcer. That's a huge plus. From the Antelope Valley days. There a lot of the TV programming, special events, magazine write-ups and whatnot. They're still using the facility, and the Thursday night test and two things kind of fun. I don't like the fact you have to run mufflers, and I got they shook me down once in tech for not having the right padding in the car, and that was a very debatable issue. You know, I would race there at Irwindale, and they would tell me that the uh, padding was, doesn't meet NHRA requirements. I said, well, this car doesn't technically even need a roll cage in it; it just needs a 6-point roll bar. And I go to Bakersfield, and they'd say, oh no, you're good. You don't need any of that. So it was, it had its pluses and minuses. Then there's Fontana. I did not, unfortunately, get a chance to run the new Fontana, but again, it's a nice facility, very tricky air, um, and a bit of a drive for people from the LA basin and from southwest Orange County. And then there's Verona. Verona's a fun facility. They got some great events scheduled out there. But again, these are just my own opinions. I don't want anybody to take this as gospel as to the decision to ever run these places or even visit if you've never been. But as a racer, the quote unquote rig that I had. I had a crew cab dually with a 26-foot enclosed trailer, and when I went to Verona once, and I found it to be very the pits were kind of not too racer friendly. It's very tight and cramped. And when you get a crowd, especially if you get a car that gets hot, like the 65 Mustang gets, when you pull off the track, you want to get back to your pit spot pretty quick. You don't want to be, held up by spectator traffic or people, pedestrian traffic walking around. And unfortunately, Verona seems to have a little bit of an issue with that. So that part's unfortunate, but it is what it is. Southern California, just the fact that you guys have 3 tracks there in the south, that operate on a regular basis in the south region of the state is just is a blessing in itself, and hopefully they'll be able to hang on to those tracks for some years to come. Regarding the new group, the California Drag Racing Memories group, I had mentioned or put a rule caption up about, we don't want to use material from those tracks, from the new Fontana, from Verona, and from the new Irwindale. And the simple fact is that those tracks are in operation now, and the photographers are taking pictures and posting them, and they have their own group sites. They all have their own websites, and there's plenty of media attention already happening with those facilities. So we don't want to muddy up the waters. The primary purpose of the group is for the old tracks. There are the legacy ones still open, like Famoso, Sacramento, and Sears Point. But we want to focus on the activity that went on during the time those other tracks were open. And it was probably around 2000. That's about when there was sort of a paradigm shift in the in the California market. So that's what we want to do. We want to stick to those rules. Anything from 1999 and earlier, any material 1999 and earlier should be safe. I have to go back and see when the new Irwindale opened. We might be able to bend the rules a little bit and allow the earlier stuff, because there's a lot of racers that are no longer with us too, and some cars that have been parked or sold and moved out of state, or even parted out to where they're not going to be around anymore. And we want to pay homage to those vehicles too. So on that note, let's see what else we got here. I'm sorry I didn't get personal with everybody on here tonight. As we refine this thing a little bit more, I'm going to try to add structure to the programming. We're going to keep the videos about an hour long. I'm going to continue looking into the YouTube venue to see if that'll give us more ability to bring in guests. I really want to do that. There is a lot of colorful experiences and stories that we got to share them. Like I said last week, with a lot of people that are no longer with us. You know, unfortunately, some of the stories go to the graves with them, and we have to stop that. We have to be able to have a way to capture that and keep it. And hopefully, with my story writing, some of the discussions I have, perhaps we could do phone calls if we can't get the video to work. But at least, you know, I want to have people hear it come from straight from the source's mouth, source's mouth, whatever you want to call it. It's always better when you hear it from them. Like the late Joe Burke, you know, Joe and Betty Burke. You know, I could talk about Joe until the cows come home and try to speak the way Joe spoke, but there was nobody like Joe. If you would have to hear a Joe Burke story, you'd have to hear it from Joe himself. And unfortunately, you know, those we can't do that now with them being gone. So, at any rate, it's about 10 o'clock, and thank you everybody for chiming in, for watching the video. And like I said, as this thing grows, we're gonna have more material. And if it gets to the point where we have too much to try to cram into an hour, I think what I'll do is we'll probably have a couple shows during the week. You know, if I had it my way, I'd do it every night, like a sports show, you know, on ESPN or FS1. It would be a dream to be able to do that, but you know, we'll take it one day at a time and see where this goes. It's I think it's great. This is the first step. The Memories of OCIR group, and from what I've seen, stacked against some of the others, has been a success. We keep it pretty tight. We keep spammers out, non essential material. Anything that doesn't pertain to OCIR gets taken out, and we try to be fair with the people that post. We have some folks that have gotten on there and just absolutely plastered the news feed with spam, and we end up getting rid of their material and getting rid of them permanently. I want to try to run the CDRM group the same sort of way, but we want to make it like I said, we're gonna make a lot of latitude for the material to cover everything up and down the state of California, going back to when drag racing started. Anybody that's got stuff that even goes back to the 40s, for that matter, on an airstrip where they had an organized event, you know, you're welcome to post it and discuss it. So, on that note, I think that'll be it, folks. Until next week. Hope to see you guys all on CDRM and Memories of OCIR this week. Keep the pictures coming. Keep the comments coming. The stories. And God bless all of you. We'll talk to you next week.